Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells, and I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I'm going to talk about Jeweled Thrones of the Earth, which is the first major adventure supplement for the Conan RPG from Modiphius. This is one of my very favorite RPGs, the favorite sword and sorcery RPGs, certainly. I like the 2d20 system a lot. I like the game a great deal, and I've talked about it and some of its other supplements quite a bit. I am not a huge fan of this particular adventure supplement. There are 7 adventures in it, and they lean very heavily, the majority of them, on this kind of Conan idea of disconnected single shot adventures. And that seems like a weird criticism to give something that is a book of single shot adventures. But uh, what what strikes me as problematic about them is that most of them don't have a solid story to pull you through it. I talked about the Adventures in the Human Sphere, which is the single-shot adventure supplement for Infinity. Same publisher, same game system, same everything. And the majority of those games, those adventures, have their own story and their own characters, and they have kind of compelling narratives that are going to pull you through. In this book, 3 of the 7 also do, and those are great. In particular, 2 of them that I really think are fantastic, kind of slot these in anywhere adventures, and then one that is a wonderful way to begin a campaign with your characters. The other 4, though, they are either very railroady or they are very just kind of devoid of story altogether. And I think that it is kind of very easy Conan pastiche to say, well, this is the part where you show up on an island and you're going to kill a bunch of monsters and then you're going to leave. That's not really what the best Conan stories are about, and it's certainly not what the best adventures here are about. Anyway, let's move in. Let's take a look at these. Boink, we'll move over to that, and then I will show you some of the things in here. So, we are looking at, these are the adventures, okay? And I'll just go through them one by one. Devils Under Green Stars is, in my opinion, I think the least interesting of the adventures in this book. It sounds very promising. It's because the premise of it is that the characters, lost in a jungle, stumble upon this lost city that is full of 3 separate tribes who are constantly warring with each other. And that sounds like it's going to present you with this really kind of exciting, triple way political mess, and you're going to have to, talk to the different tribes and get them to work with each other, or you're going to have to strike a deal with one, or maybe you're going to have to pit one against the other one, and that's not what it is. It really is just a very straightforward railroad in which you chase a monster through the city, and in the process you encounter all 3 tribes in order. There's really nothing that makes one tribe more redeemable than another tribe, and so you don't have a lot of reasons for any of the decisions that the game assumes that you'll be making in order to lead you from one set piece to the next. I would also suggest that this one falls into some of the kind of racial overtones that make a lot of Robert E. Howard's work problematic. The idea that these, primitive jungle tribes is already going to upset a lot of people regardless of how well it is handled. But on top of that, this one has a couple of other kind of tropey things that I think are going to turn off a lot of the audience. So, anyway, let's move on. The Pact of Shia is a little more interesting, but it still doesn't really have a lot to pull you through. The idea here is that you are shipwrecked on an island. Excuse me. You are shipwrecked on an island, and it's almost like a Circe and Medea kind of thing, where you find a witch on this island. But in this case, the witch is a castaway and is immortal, and wants to get you to go back in time with her to when she cast the immortality spell and kill the younger her so that she is no longer cursed with this horrible immortality. That sounds really interesting, but again, in practice, there's really nobody to talk to. There's no decisions to make. You just go from one combat to another against an irredeemably evil string of bad guys. So there's not a lot of compelling narrative in it. It looks like it might be fun as just a straight monster bash if that's what you're looking for, but I would like to think that this game is capable of more than that, and certainly some of the later adventures are. Caves of Darrow. The Caves of Darrow presents a really interesting premise, which is basically that you start off with a treasure map and you go hunting for it, and you find underground what isn't really a lost civilization, but it's a lost group of people called the Darrow, and they are kind of weirdly artificial, and it turns out that there's a thing that's just creating them and popping them out. I'm being very spoilery with some of these that I don't like very much, and I apologize for that. I probably shouldn't be. There's never really any good answers given, and what answers are given mostly through less interesting means. There's no one you can talk to. There's not really any investigation to do. There's basically one wall full of historical art and writings, and if you translate it, then you get to know some of what's going on. But some of the really more fascinating ideas that this adventure has, such as the idea that this entire cave, this underground cave, is actually the inside of an enormous kind of head-shaped statue. That doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't go anywhere. And so at the end of the day, it is, once again, a monster bash without anyone you can talk to, without anyone you can ally with, without anything other than another string of monsters to crush. And there aren't really any mysteries to solve on the way to crushing them. So, there you go. Excuse me. I do not have the coronavirus, but I do have a cold, and it's messing up my voice quite a bit. So, thanks for sticking with me. Now we get to this one, the fourth one, Ghost of Thunder River. For my money, this is the best one in this book, and I actually genuinely love it. I don't like to review games that I don't like. If you see something on my channel, the odds are that I like it and I think you should purchase it. I've just bashed the first 3 adventures in this supplement pretty hard. Why am I reviewing it then? Because I do think that Chapter 4, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6 are great. And they do a really good job of, taking the Conan mythos, doing fun things with it, presenting you with a meaningful story with compelling narrative and good villains you're going to want to fight and good allies you're going to want to help. And that starts here with number 4. So what is most immediately interesting about number 4 is that the villain in it, the actual ghost of Thunder River, you're not likely to get to know who that is or what that is very early. You might not even get to see this thing or person or whatever, this ghost, until the final showdown. It is also takes, and the reason that I think that's interesting, I'm getting to, stick with me. The other thing is that the ghost of Thunder River is leading a band of the Picts, and in the Conan mythos, in the Conan universe, the Picts are kind of half cavemen and half the worst stereotypes of early Native American warriors. And so, again, there's a lot of racial baggage tied up in the Conan license to begin with. And it would be very easy to turn those Picts into faceless monsters, and that is often what happens in the original stories. What this one does, which I think is fabulous, is it actually starts off with a prologue in which you are all playing as Picts, and you get to introduce yourselves to each other. You know, there's little handouts where you're like, okay, this is your character, play a scene, and you're going to go through a scene or two in which you eventually encounter the ghost of Thunder River and then get brutally murdered by it. And what that does is right off the bat, it communicates to the players the idea that the Picts, while traditionally seen as bad guys, are not faceless, nameless evil. They have just played as these characters. They know these characters. They know the culture. And so they're already kind of predisposed to like it and trust it and to see them as victims in this particular situation, even though they're going to spend a lot of the rest of the adventure fighting against them. And so with that already established in their head, they're going to start thinking, well, wait, the ghost of... And this is not a spoiler because this is literally the prologue of the entire adventure. They're going to think to themselves, the ghost of Thunder River murdered all those Picts that we were playing. Why is the ghost now leading them? What happened? And that's going to set off the right questions in the right ways in your players' minds. And so as they go through to try to stop the ghost, they're going to constantly be aware of the fact that the Picts might not be willingly helping. And what that does, in the end, is it establishes a really great storytelling arc. You get to see the villain right up front. You get to demonstrate how awful they are. That leads towards a very satisfying showdown at the end. And then meanwhile, of course, there's this deeper mystery of what's going on. And you don't automatically want to, you know, it's not the monster bash that some of the other adventures are, because of the way that it has established itself and because of the questions that it asks and because of the answers that it eventually provides to those questions. On top of that, of course, the Pictish frontier provides you with, you know, kind of a classic frontier fort kind of situation, and so there's other people that you can talk to, and that fort will include both good and bad people. In those first 3 adventures that I've already talked about, there's really nothing for a character to do who focuses on social skills. The game has a robust set of social skills and persuasive things and ways to talk to people, and this one, Ghost of the Thunder River, is the adventure that finally gives those characters something to do and a chance to shine and a way to talk to people, to make allies, to make enemies of people. And it has some interesting social dynamics going on in addition to the cool mystery, in addition to the cool monster. Really great adventure, and I just want to give it props for that. So, hooray for the Ghost of the Thunder River. The Thousand Eyes of Amag Bell is similar in that it is not a straight monster bash. It presents you with an interesting story and a cool mystery to solve and a cool thing to explore, while at the same time giving you a lot of people to interact with. And so you actually get to do role-playing instead of just combat. It starts off in a huge city, which is already very different from all of the other ones, and very much in keeping with Conan. A lot of his adventures took place in very large cities. In this particular one, there's a mystery going on. There's some kind of ancient evil cult, and you begin by having to kind of track down and make friends with this kind of group of street rat child thieves that are living in the alleys and fending for themselves, and they have the secrets that can help you unravel the rest of the story. And so there's already a lot of fun things going on, and it just gets worse and it gets darker. Most of these stories at the end of the day are horror stories because it's Conan, and that's really what he was doing. This one, I think, more than any of them, really delves into that, sinks its teeth into that idea, and comes up with some really horrific situations to confront your characters. And I really enjoyed it for that reason. So, A plus for the Thousand Eyes of Amok Bell. Now, Chapter 6, The Red Pit. I said that earlier that one of these adventures is a great way to begin a campaign, and The Red Pit is it. It isn't really a full story. What it is Chapter 1 of a very long story. And so it's presenting you with this premise and then letting you spin off from there. Really what it is kind of going back to the roots of Conan, where every adventure starts in a completely different situation. This one starts you off as slaves, working in a quarry. First of all, the game is very concerned that the mere concept of slavery is going to be too much for people, and it absolutely might be for certain audiences. And so it does give some alternatives and some ways to run the adventure without making the characters start as slaves or become slaves at all. And I'm glad that they have that option, because that could be a very triggering thing for a lot of people. But either way, whether you start as slaves or whether you start as prisoners, or however you end up spinning that and which options that you choose, it's essentially just a prison break. You are captured, you're at the bottom of this quarry, and you throw off your chains and you escape. It doesn't have a fantastically compelling villain, because it doesn't need one. What it has are, a series of obstacles. Some of them people, some of them monsters, some of them just the geography of the quarry. And once you overcome all of those things and you get out of the pit, then the world is your oyster. You're ready to go off and start your campaign, start your story as heroes and adventurers. You could absolutely slot this into the middle of an ongoing Conan campaign, which would be, like I said, very in keeping with the spirit of how Conan's stories were presented. But I really think the best way to do this is make it your very first thing. Get your group together, have everyone build their characters, then immediately take away all their stuff, throw them into the bottom of this quarry, and say, okay, you're prisoners, escape. And that's how they get to know each other, that's how their story starts, and then every height that they eventually achieve in the course of their campaign, they know that they started at the absolute bottom rung, lowest of the low, fighting their way to freedom with nothing but some makeshift weapons and chains. So, The Red Pit, really great adventure. Seethers in Darkness gets back to kind of the uninterestingness of the first one. It starts promisingly with yet another city where a guy is there and he hires you to come help him search for treasure, and at which point it essentially turns into a fairly uninteresting dungeon crawl. You end up in a city under the ground that is filled with old lizard people mummies and not much else. There's 2 or 3 monster types, but 90% of your fights are going to be against reptile mummy people. And so again, there's no one to talk to, there's no one to ally with, there's no one to ally against. There's no real opportunities for interaction past, the first scene where the guy hires you. And then at that point on, it's just exploring a cave and fighting the same monster over and over again. So now we get into Chapter 8. And Chapter 8 is what is going to, in my opinion, redeem some of these other adventures that didn't work as well. It's got 3 of the 7 that are fantastic, and then 4 that don't do it for me. Maybe they do it for you. What Chapter 8 does is it gives you a lot of options of how to change these adventures, how to string them together into a campaign. One of the options that it gives is you start with the Red Pit, like I've suggested, and then you go forward and you can put them in this particular order, and this is how they could all lead one into the other. Alternately, it gives an option where you just kind of start and stop, and you can take them in any order, and things just kind of happen to you, and you have to roll with the punches, and sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down. That is a little more Conan-esque, but one thing the game doesn't really provide for. And this is interesting because one of the things I love about this game is the way that it can replicate that Conan-style storytelling, where each adventure is separate from the others, and where sometimes you're a pirate, or a thief, or a mercenary, or a king, or a slave, or whatever it is. And that's cool, and the game can do it, but what the game doesn't handle very well is the concept of your experience. It offers experience points at the end of each adventure, and you can use that to improve your character and become stronger and better. But if you're doing the Conan style thing of jumping around through time, and maybe now we're telling a story when he's older and he's a warlord, and then next we're going to jump back to when he was a younger thief, why does he have all those experience points from the other thing? Like, there's a lot of stuff that the game doesn't model very well in that sense. And so there is a sense of constant progression chronologically from beginning to end, and so you kind of have to deal with that. Although it's obviously totally possible to do a campaign in which you do progress chronologically rather than jumping around, but just that your fortunes will jump around rather than your actual place in time. Either way, Seeds of Glory ends with a bunch of other adventure ideas, and there's a dozen or so, maybe more of those, that are just a quick paragraph saying, here's a cool thing, spin this off into an idea. And really, I think that's the best way to use those other 4 adventures as well, is something like The Devil Under Green Stars. If your game master wants to take the time to actually build some really interesting politics into that, to build in some redeemable, interesting characters to talk to, people that you will want to interact with instead of just fight and murder, then Devil Under Green Stars can turn into a really fascinating premise for an adventure. And the same with all of these other stories. If you want to take the time to build on them, then they are seeds, as it says in the chapter title. They are seeds of fantastic new stories that you can tell. So, at the end of the day, that's what I'm doing. I am definitely recommending this because I do think that chapters 4, 5, and 6 are worth it, and they are worth the price tag. If you want to play Conan and you aren't sure where to start, you need some adventures, those 3 are wonderful ways to get into it. And the other 4, with some effort, can be turned into really fantastic, appropriately Conan-esque stories that you can tell and that you can adapt to your group and that you can make work. So there you go. Conan, let's show you the. There you go. Jeweled Thrones of the Earth. That comes from one of the quotes in one of the books where he wants to tread the jeweled thrones of the earth beneath his sandaled feet. And that's a quote from the Robert E. Howard Conan story. So anyway, I do recommend this. With that caveat that it's going to take some effort on the part of your GM to really turn it into something amazing. But as a fount of ideas, as a core, where do I start and what do I do and how do I make it feel right, this adventure supplement is a great one. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you get a chance to try this game, whether or not you try this adventure supplement. And I will see you on my next review.